Welcome to the Alphagenix Podcast, where every week we talk to incredible individuals from the world of health, well-being, longevity, biohacking, and of course, men's health. And today we're talking to the incredible James Seilo. James, we haven't known each other very long. We sort of stumbled across each other on LinkedIn only recently, but we've already had some incredible conversations, and I'm looking forward to today.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Ross. Yeah, it feels like we've known each other for a while. I don't know if you feel the same. Maybe it's just me.
No, absolutely. And it's been about 10 days or so, or something like that.
Yeah, no, it's bizarre.
It is
bizarre.
So, who is James Seilo? Where have you been? What are you up to? What are you passionate about?
Sure. So I've been probably in the fitness industry for about 20 years. But prior to that, I did a whole kind of myriad of jobs. It was a real sort of yellow pages of stuff that I've done. So I worked in freight forwarding. I've worked at TGI Fridays. I was a cocktail bartender. So I'd like chucking Collins glasses over my shoulder and kind of rolling them down my arm, all that sort of stuff, showing off behind the bar. I've worked in retail, done a bit in recruitment. So a real sort of mix of stuff that I've done. And then up until the point where I became a trainer, working for a company for 10 years, doing import customs clearance work, air freight stuff. So, but just decided by about the age of 30, I'd had enough. Guys were coming in their sort of 50s, 60s, and they were talking about what they'd seen on the TV the night before. And I kind of saw a vision of my future. And I'd always been into sort of sport and fitness and things like that, kept fit at university and college and all that sort of thing. So I thought, I've got to get out. I've got to do something different. So I took all of my holiday, 4 weeks back to back, went and did a course in PT. And on the final day that I was there was a letter that came through, a job offer, and it was for a GP referral scheme. So basically people going to the GP, getting a prescription for exercise, and then they go and get, free or reduced rate training in the gym. And we were there as trainers to basically take them through a program of exercise based on, why they were there. So we had people with obviously, high blood pressure, diabetes, stroke patients as well. So it was a really, really good grounding. I'd highly recommend something like that for anybody starting out in the industry, to cut their teeth on something like that, because it really teaches you how to deal with those complex cases. And you then develop your own sort of pattern, the way you are with people and how you encourage them to be active. All the knowledge in the world is fine, but if you can't sort of put it across to the individual, then you're kind of missing the point. So that was a great sort of foundation for me. I also was just remembering this yesterday because I did another podcast, that I did deep water aquatherapy. So we had ladies of a certain age, let's say, with their flotation devices around their waists and bobbing up and down in the pool. And there was me on the side of the pool taking them through a deep water aquatherapy class. So I've pretty much kind of done it all. Then moved into boot camps. I had completely different sort of stuff. I just wanted it to be fun. So we had like adult space hoppers. So we had people bouncing around on these space hoppers like loons. We had swing ball in between stations so they could have like a recovery, but just something, it was really play, just to take their sort of minds off the exercise they were doing. And then my PT business was still sort of ongoing, doing one-to-ones, as I say, smaller groups as well. And then I sort of got into working with sort of devices, let's say. So I've always been interested in doing something a bit different, as you probably kind of gathered from what I've just said, but using like power plate, for example. So vibration training, and developed from there into where we are today, EMS, electrical muscle stimulation. So I was introduced to it by one of my clients. A friend of his works out at a gym in Chelsea. The footballers were using it, And he said to me, James, you've got to find out about this. So I then went away, did a bit of research. There's a expo in Europe, one of the biggest, called FIBO, which in the industry we all know about. And they were doing a tour. So they go to sort of Milan or Rome, and they came to London. So I went up to London and fortuitously met with a guy who was opening up the UK market for this particular product. So met with him. Long story short, my client bought a system for him, and I bought a system for my business as well. So I'm going to pause for breath there and you ask me some questions.
Yeah, that's the last sort of 20 years of your life in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
There's quite a few similarities, actually. So I worked in a bar in Faliraki, spinning bottles, which was quite
nice.
I had no idea how to do it when I got there. And I totally blagged my way into this job. The guy said, do you know how to bar freestyle? I said, yeah, of course I do. I did not. So when the first group came in that night, I dropped the bottle left, right, and centre, had the anti-fatigue flooring down so the bottles didn't smash. But the only trick I did know was that if you span the bottle top really fast and then blew on it, the bottle top would lift off. So after dropping this bottle about 10 times, I did that. This group of holiday makers laughed, and my manager thought I'd done it on purpose. He said, that's the funniest thing I've ever seen, and hired me.
You got the job. You got the job. Brilliant.
So I had the whole summer to work out actually how to do it. But that was funny. And then as a physio, I actually did a hydro placement as well. So did a lot of aquatherapy.
We're like twins. I know I've said this before. We sort of, we'd be stunt doubles for each other at some point.
We do have the same haircut as well. So
we do.
So tell us about the course a little bit, because PT is interesting, isn't it? You can become qualified in like a day, or you can do like a
weekend.
You can do like a weekend online thing, and all of a sudden you could have the same qualification as someone like yourself who did something for a month and then worked in the NHS. Do you think, or why is it allowed, I guess?
Well, it's an interesting kind of concept. It's a great question. That it's fairly unregulated. I mean, back in the day, there was sort of reps, this kind of register of exercise professionals, and you had CPD points, your continuous development, and all that sort of thing that was set up that, you should do courses. And, that 4-week course that I did initially, I did several afterwards. But, again, kind of weekend ones that you would go and sort of do strength and conditioning, or, how to stretch correctly, optimum nutrition, all that sort of stuff. So you do these kind of subsequent courses. So, but it's still a very unregulated industry. I mean, there's lots out there. I mean, obviously with physiotherapy, it's different. If you want to be a doctor, it's very different. But, anybody can set themselves up as a PT. And if nobody does the research around it, then they're going to be none the wiser. But that said, I mean, I would take somebody on in terms of a business. I would have somebody that had the right attitude. They had the affinity with people, that they can be empathetic, that they have that capacity to be able to listen to people and see what their needs are. As I said, you can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you're not listening, if you're not sort of applying it with that level of specificity that we love to say in the industry, that it's pointless. It's crazy. So, you've got these kind of things. On the one hand, obviously, you need to be qualified to be safe, but also you need to have, the aptitude to be able to deliver that to the client. Yeah. So a combination of the two is utopia.
Again, lots of synergies, because I've told many people that, I made a pretty good career as a physiotherapist, but I was an average physiotherapist, I would say. And what I mean by that is lots of my colleagues read far more articles than I did and went on way more courses than I did. But I had a high level of empathy, generally very good at communicating with my patients. So they did what I asked them to do, and most of them got better. All of them would be untrue, but most of them got better, which means they wanted to come back, and then they told people. So yeah, I think what you've said there is really important. It is about communication, trust, rapport, being able to get your point across. So people listen to you, and because ultimately they could see a PT or a physio for an hour a week, but there's still 6 days and 23 hours when it's what they do that matters, not what they're doing in that hour with you or I. So
yeah, absolutely,
isn't it? You've got to get your message across.
Yeah, 100%. And it's getting that sort of client buy-in, that at the end of the day, if you're being sent away with a photocopy or a poorly photocopied sheet of paper with some exercises or stickmen on it, and they're going, well, no idea what I'm doing, and it's, you'll know as well as I do, that's the biggest issue that we come across. Is that they listen, or they seem to be listening to what you're saying, and then they'll potentially go away and then completely forget about it within a very short period of time. So it's communicating the reasons why they're doing it. They have to fundamentally understand what it's going to do for them. Otherwise, it's like, well, I'm just going through the motions.
Yeah.
So it really is making sure that they understand why they're doing it, how it's going to benefit them, and then an expectation, managing expectations in terms of how long it's going to take, so they don't think this is going to be fixed in a week. That keep doing this, trust me, it will start making a difference, and give them a timeline, and then when things do start to happen within that timeline, you're then reinforcing that trust and belief that actually you are telling them to do the right things.
Yeah.
So in terms of my kind of client base, I've had clients, I said I've been doing this sort of 20 years. I've had clients for sort of between 16 and 18 years. And you develop those relationships, that trust, which then interestingly enabled me to bring in other tools like EMS, for example, because they trusted my judgment and they knew that I wasn't going to do anything to hurt them. So in respect of what I then brought in terms of training protocols, they were more than happy to try it, especially when I told them that it would sort of massively reduce the amount of time they'd have to do the workout for.
Yeah.
So double, if not triple the sort of the results. They were all in. Yeah. So, it just wasn't an issue to bring new stuff into the training.
Because as you say, because you've got that trust and that rapport, that partnership, I guess you've kind of developed. And one thing I think is really important that you sort of touched on there is the quality of the questions that we ask are super important, because nobody in the history of the world, I think, has ever been to physiotherapy to fix their back because they've got back pain. They go because their back pain is stopping them from picking up their grandkids or from driving their car, and actually, since they've been recently widowed, driving to see their friends are the only release that they really get. And I think with fitness as well, people don't go just to lose weight. They go to lose weight because it's their sister's wedding coming up, or they've got a family reunion or something. And actually drilling down to that level is what motivates someone, isn't it? And when they're having a hard day, you can pull them back and say, no, look, remember, this is our goal. So I think it's the quality of the questions, and a lot of that probably comes down to that training again, and are we taught that in the very beginning?
No, 100%. And I think we're never as motivated as when we're in pain. We're never as motivated when we're going to be exposed in some way. Yeah. We're never as motivated as when there's something coming up that means something. And going back to your point that it's that sort of, wedding that's coming up, or you've got a photo shoot, or, you're going to be in a situation where you're going to have to perform. And if you don't perform, you're going to be, exposed in whatever way that looks like. But certainly, if you're in pain, if you've got an issue, you don't want to be in pain. So you're going to do something about it. The problem we've got is when you're then not in pain, is how you maintain those good behaviors that we've got, put so much effort into getting them into this sort of, series where they've gone from being sort of unconsciously incompetent, that whole kind of process through. Yeah. So then we've got them to the point where they can do it, and it's become sort of a thing that they're doing regularly enough to get them out of pain, but then motivating them to actually continue doing it so they don't go back into the pain. And that's the issue, that we just go through this kind of roller coaster of behaviors that as soon as we're out of pain, it's like, oh, great, I can go back to my old behaviors, no problem at all, eat what I like, sleep in that particular way, or just, sit down all the time and not get up and move around. And then, back's gone again. Okay, so I'm kind of back on it. And it's very much like you're kind of akin to that whole cycle of the year that you have of the New Year's resolution. And then as soon as you hit January, you are the most motivated you've ever been in your entire life. This is going to be my year. Every other year behind, that was that year. This year, I'm going to do it. Come March, maybe next year.
Yeah.
And then you sort of get to the point where it's, we're looking at summer holidays. So maybe kind of June time, you're thinking, possibly need to lose a few pounds because I'm going to go on the beach, or I'm going to be with my friend here and they are in amazing shape and I'm going to just look like a beach whale blob next to them on the beach towel. And then you sort of go through into the kind of the little black dress, the tuxedo that you want to be wearing for your Christmas party. And so continues the cycle. So, we are just in these constant loops. So really our roles are to educate in the longevity. And this is what we're sort of moving into, is this kind of health span field of, it's not always about the aesthetic, although that's hugely important. That's a great starting point to focus on the aesthetic, because, the majority of us, myself included, have a level of vanity that will, keep us on a level. I think it's that point at which you can just kind of pull yourself back, that you don't go too far over the edge, that you just go, actually, I haven't done anything in a while, I need to start again. So you're just kind of reining yourself in. So the psychology is hugely important as well, but it's just that kind of feathering of the clutch, really, to keep you at such a level that your outcomes are looking better, to be able to move forward healthier for longer. And there's huge amounts of research coming out now that will enable us to do that. But certainly we can talk in more detail about that.
Oh, definitely, because that's one of the passions, isn't it, that we've talked a lot about over the last 10 days or 2 weeks, however long we've known each other, is that passion for longevity. Technology has come a long way. We are living longer as a species, but what is the point of living longer if you don't have health? And nobody wants to live forever if you're, stuck in a chair and can't get out. But, I have this conversation often with my kids and my wife, and they're like, I wouldn't want to live forever. So I'd love to live forever as long as I was healthy. As long as I could experience life and do everything I wanted to do, then I think it would be incredible.
Yeah.
As you say, it's hard to keep motivated when the pain goes away. So people do tend to sort of yo-yo around, and you hit on another interesting thing there, which was this idea of vanity. And vanity is often portrayed as something negative, but I would suggest in the right amount it can be motivational. And actually, if we're proud of how we look, it has a profound influence on our mental health as well.
I agree.
Our self-confidence, we can handle ourselves better in social situations, or indeed just take more pride in everything that we do. So I don't think it's all bad.
No, I totally agree, 100%. I think, if we were all honest with ourselves, that we would admit that. I think it goes a long way to, keep you on the sort of straight and narrow. But just going back to your point in terms of longevity, it's interesting. There's a guy, Peter Diamandis, that I think he went to the Vatican, gave a talk at the Vatican, room full of people. And one of the opening salvos that he sort of sent across this crowd was, if I asked how many of you would want to live to 120, give me a show of hands to give me an indication. It was probably 4 or 5 people, he reckoned, put their hands up. And he said, well, now if I told you that if you could get to 120 and you had the capabilities of a sort of 60, 70-year-old, cognitively speaking, physically you had that ability, now how many people would, want to live to that sort of age? And everybody's hand goes up. So it is that sort of belief system that why would you want, exactly as you said, why would you want to live that long if quality of life isn't there? Well, that's absolutely right. You wouldn't want to. Mm-hmm. But if the potential is there that you could at that time in your life have the same levels as we have now at age 60/70, then that's a completely different prospect. And what some research and I forget the guy's name, but he's an American researcher, doctor, that has maintained that in sort of 10 to 15 years time, so in a relatively short space of time, we're going to reach this longevity escape velocity, that for every year that we live with science and technology, that we're going to get more than a year back.
Wow. Is that David Sinclair, Dr. David Sinclair?
Well, it was another chap, and again, I forget his name, but he sort of maintains that in a very short period of time, like sort of 10 to 15 years or so, we will be at a point. If you think of how the iPhone has developed over such a short period of time, since 2007, 2008, mm-hmm. and what we have now today. Well, if the body's going in the same way, and billions of dollars and pounds are being pumped into the space, that it stands to reason that pretty quickly we're going to get to that point where 3D printed organs, for example, where stem cell therapy is going, from umbilical cord blood and everything else that's coming out now, that we can really start to make a huge impact on how long we live. But fundamentally, the desire has to be there. If the desire isn't there, then what is the point? And it kind of moves us into these kind of real pillars of longevity and sort of health span in respect of sleep, for example. I know you've done a podcast on sleep. It's probably I'm not going to do this in order, but that kind of comes pretty much at the top. And I think we massively underestimate how important sleep is. It's that whole sort of adage that I'm too busy living, I don't want to be sleeping, I'm kind of and especially
on death, that whole thing. Yeah.
So it's that whole kind of adage that when we're young, it's like I'm out partying and I'm hitting it hard, and I'll do all that kind of shit when I'm older. But so sleep pretty much does come at the top, but it's really kind of looking at the diet, certainly exercise, but around diet, you can then sort of move into fasting, time restricted eating and all that sort of thing, being more plant-based, less red meat, that majority of us are knowing about now, that actually, too much of that isn't a good thing. They're sort of saying that certainly processed meats, like sort of bacon, salami and all that sort of thing, are sort of a type 1 carcinogenic. And it's, all these sort of things that are now sort of coming into the fore, and kind of obviously exercise, massive thing. All these processes that are triggered by, exercise, strength training, but also cardiovascular as well. So aerobic sort of exercise. But then we kind of move into the sphere of mindfulness. Mm-hmm. So, just being more mindful of where we are, kind of cognitive. So breathing techniques, meditation, forest bathing, where you go out and walk in greenery, and just be aware of what's going on around you, being present and all that sort of thing. But really another fundamental one that probably comes just underneath sleep is relationships. And that connection, if that isn't there, and it's again being shown in terms of these, Dan Buettner blue zones. Mm-hmm. If you've heard of these, he did a TED talk back in 2010, I believe. and all these different areas of the world where they did research around it, and they sort of looked at their diet and their lifestyle and everything else. Obviously, environment has a big impact. We've got kind of external stressors and pollution and all that sort of thing. These elements that are there, but human connection and community and service to others is massively important.
Yeah.
So that sense of purpose is really, really key. So kind of all of those factors, having those goals and that kind of that tribal element, I guess, of being part of something and contributing to it, that's as equal importance to sleep, if not on a sort of a par, really.
Yeah, it's fascinating, the stuff about blue zones. I went out to the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica a couple of years ago, and it was amazing to kind of be in one of these zones and just see what it is like out there in terms of sense of community. And myself and my daughter are actually going to Okinawa next year to sample another one of these blue zones.
Wow!
And of course, in Japan, they call that community service ikigai, which is, there is no English translation, but it's everything you just said. It's that service to the community, working together, that oneness. And when you look at everything going on in the Western world, it's the opposite. We're even in the same room sometimes, we're not present. We're looking at our phones. You see whole families, and I have, of course, been guilty of this in the past as well, especially when working, but looking at my phone instead of looking at my family, and it's common. So this sense of community, I think, is getting less in the Western world. We've had the Industrial Revolution. Two parents now often go out to work, so the family unit's been changed. Now friends talk to each other on their phone instead of in person. We're getting further away, I think, from this sense of belonging, and you've got to wonder whether that is one of the contributing factors to the fact that health is going down, not up. Longevity might be going up in terms of years on the planet, but health is deteriorating. We're fatter. We've got more chronic disease. We've got more inflammatory problems. We've got more ADHD and autism, and we've got all of these issues. And I think it is probably because we're moving away from those ancestral tenets, almost those core key things that you mentioned.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, akin to that is our loss of agency over our own health outcomes. I think we're so now reliant on these kind of external factors that we've forgotten, or they've been switched off. So, other stuff that we're going to talk about is the way in which you can switch back on processes within the body that, because of our modern lifestyles, have been switched off.
Yeah.
So, we've become reliant on, having a pill,
to fall asleep, Paul.
Yeah, being given something. I can't do this, so what can you give me? And that sort of mentality, and with things like social media, I know we sort of bash social media and all that sort of thing, but kind of vying for our attention all the time. And I'll speak for myself, but I'm of a certain age that we tend to have these kind of views on the younger generation, and the way that they're acting, and how reliant they are, and they're losing that ability to be able to think for themselves. But that's from my generational perspective. That doesn't mean to say that's true. That's just a perception. So, that's purely. But I think that sort of pervades, society to an extent that we are. And I think actually saying that we're coming back a little bit. I think with, again, social media in a good way, showing how, that is possible. That we've got podcasts now, we've got YouTube, we've got all that information at our fingertips. We just need to look for it. And literally, that's all I've done. You know, I'm not educated in that way. I don't have, you know, letters after my name. I don't have a doctorate, any of that sort of thing. All I've done is just research around something that I'm incredibly interested in, and getting more and more interested as I'm getting older for obvious reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think, you know, if we can just look at what is out there and try it, you know, just test it out, use ourselves at that sort of test base, rather than just trusting necessarily in what we're being told, give it a go. There's a lot of kind of anecdotal stuff, evidence that I've found. So about 3 years ago, went vegan. I mean, did it gradually, and it's like all of these sort of protocols. It's like going and having a cold shower, or, you know, going and using a sauna, or going and running a marathon, or anything like that. You wouldn't just go and do it tomorrow. You build up, you know, barefoot running I've done, you build up to it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're so wanting to kind of get it right now that we go and do it, injure ourselves, and it's like, oh, well, that was a waste of time. I shouldn't have done that. Or we have some sort of adverse reaction. Build up to it. Do it slowly. It's more meaningful. Be mindful around it. So going back to the kind of veganism, I went sort of pescatarian, so only eating fish, then went full sort of vegetarian, and then full vegan on that. I'm not a great vegan. I'll put my hand up. Occasionally a bit of cake comes in. If my daughter makes cookies, I'm toast. I mean, I don't stand a chance. But those are occasional.
Yeah.
So, but over the main, I'm plant-based, and it's that belief system. It's like, I am the type of person that will ... And if that isn't there, it's very, very difficult to change those kind of behavior patterns. So you have to have that level of belief in what you're doing. So anecdotally, for me, I used to get headaches all the time, migraines, be tired, waking up in the morning, not feeling like I've really slept properly, having digestive issues, you know, just going to the toilet quite a lot, and not really sort of evacuating properly. Stomach cramps, bloated, all that sort of thing. All gone. So, you know, I'm not pushing a product. I'm not trying to say, it's just anecdotally how that's worked for me. It's not for everybody. I understand that, but it's just worked for me. And I can't then be sort of judgmental of other people because I did it for 40 odd years.
Yeah.
But all I know is, you know, anecdotally is how it's benefited me. So I tried it, and literally within a week, I could see the difference. Now, very likely, if I hadn't seen the difference so quickly, I probably wouldn't have kept going with it.
Yeah, really gone back. Yeah,
absolutely.
I think that's interesting, isn't it? Because plant-based diets are becoming more popular, I think you could probably say. And I had a fantastic conversation with someone recently who was carnivore. So, you know, you can't get more different. But I think what you said there was really important, and it harks back to something I say quite often, which is all 8 billion of us on the planet look different. We shouldn't be surprised that our insides are different too. So whether you're vegan or whether you're carnivore, I think the important part is that you're eating whole food. You're not eating processed stuff, whatever end of the spectrum it is, full of pesticides, herbicides, toxins, and chemicals. It's natural. It grew. You know, it was on the planet.
Yeah.
It wasn't created or man-made. And I think you probably can't go too far wrong there. And depending on how you metabolize things, then you might be better as a vegan or better as a carnivore. But I think, yeah, the key is probably not doing that processed bit.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think, you know, as vegans, we tend to sort of make that mistake of being, you know, quite critical or judgmental. And you're going to get pushback. You're going to get pushback. So, you know, why would you do that? I mean, I think utopia is, you know, having that sort of level of balance. And as you said, you know, being predominantly plant-based, and, you know, and again, it's that whole kind of question, where do you get your protein and all that sort of thing? But, you know, there's absolutely, you can get enough protein from a plant-based diet. You know, certainly sort of nuts and seeds, and, you know, with tofus, and, you know, there's so much now out there. The choice is incredible. I mean, you get, obviously from plants, you get protein from plants, and you look at large animals that are purely, vegetarian.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Look at a gorilla, for example. I mean, he's a bit of a brute.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, it's interesting. It is interesting, and it's pretty divisive. And but at the end of the day, it's everybody's choice, and that's fundamentally it. But I mean, going back to again those kind of processes that we were talking about in the body that get switched off when you think about what I will say actually with diet is we were never designed to eat in the quantities and frequency that we eat now. Mm-hmm. So all of those, what we've talked about, taken into consideration, is that we're eating in such volume and such regularity that our systems were never designed, sort of that kind of hunter-gatherer thing. If you had whatever was around you, sort of, nuts and seeds on the floor and berries, etc., you would have those to hand. You think about the energy required to go and hunt something and track it down. Huge amounts of energy required. So it's inefficient. So why would you do it? So evolutionary speaking, you wouldn't put a lot of energy into, you would do it occasionally, or if something sort of stumbled across and just fell over and died, well, great. Then let's look at it. But, you would take things from the environment that take very little energy to cultivate. So, and that would be kind of famine and feast. So you'd have these periods of not eating much and then eating a lot. So again, the mechanisms are geared towards that kind of eating habit. So when we're looking at fasting, for example, the fascinating thing with fasting is it's like a reboot for the system. So anything over about sort of 48 hours, for example, you can then start to, actually it's probably less time than that, but anywhere between sort of a day, 2 days, and 4 days, you're activating this process called autophagy. So it's like cell death, that if you've got a cell that's kind of gone bad, they sort of describe them as zombie cells, that the body will start to then kind of reabsorb them. Mm. So, those cells could become cancerous, for example. You've got these enzymes, sirtuins, that will control sort of longevity in that respect. So, when you're exercising, when you're fasting, these things become activated. They feed on NAD. Now, I'm going to try and get this right because I always stumble over the pronunciation of this, but it's NAD plus. So it's this nicotinamide adenine nucleotide. So and the plus is that, but it's got no sort of hydrogen molecule attached to it. But anyway, so it needs that. So when you fast and when you exercise, those levels increase, and that cell death is then a result of that. So this kind of chain reaction starts to kind of happen. And there's another process, apoptosis, which is very similar. It's that kind of it's like the programmed cell death, basically. So you've got these cells that are kind of gone bad, and they're then affecting other cells around them. So purely through not eating for a couple of days, you can activate these pathways that will then potentially dispose of something that could do you harm. I mean, that's the most simple way of putting it.
Yeah, kind of cleans it out, doesn't it?
Cleans it out. So like reboot for the system. So you'll get a certain level of kind of organ shrinkage. So your internal organs will shrink. You'll get some muscle atrophy as well. So some sort of muscle loss as well. But as soon as you refeed, that then comes back very quickly. So you don't need to worry about losing muscle density. But certainly, getting into ketosis, with those ketones, that's sort of the chemical that's released to break down fats. So, going into that sort of process, obviously you're going to lose fat. So it's a win-win. I mean, I can't see any downside apart from feeling bloody hungry. over the first day. The second day is easier. I mean, I've done a 4-day maximum actually, and I do this occasionally. Maybe I'll do it a couple of times a year, like an extended one. And then periodically I'll do like a day fast here and a day fast there, or a couple of days. You certainly don't do it a lot, but just periodically do it. So again, it's one of those things that you don't just go straight into it. Maybe, don't have breakfast one day. Maybe don't have lunch one day, but have your breakfast and your dinner. You're just reducing that calorie intake down gradually. Yeah. So you're not going cold turkey, keeling over because you feel, nauseous or lightheaded, whatever. Just do it gradually.
Yeah.
So over a period of time,
protocol, isn't it?
That's absolutely
to start. So you have 16 hours off eating, 8 hours on, which sounds horrific, but if you sleep for 10 hours,
you've no idea it's going on.
Yeah, exactly.
No idea it's happening.
You just stop eating after your main meal on a night at say 6 o'clock, and then you don't have breakfast. You just miss one meal, eat lunch, and you've done it. Yeah,
totally. So it's when you build up to it, it's easier. I'm not saying at any point it's pleasant. It's very much like, again, one of these kind of factors is like stressors, for example, cold showers. Just uncomfortable. The majority of things that actually are good for us aren't necessarily pleasant.
Yeah.
But it is these extremes. So where we never had air conditioning, we never had central heating. So the body had to switch these mechanisms on to deal with it. And actually those mechanisms being switched on were beneficial to us. But where, again, when I come back to that comment about we've become sort of, I'm like vanilla. It's just kind of we've become sort of at this level now that we're always comfortable. We're not going to go to sort of exercise to the extreme. We're not going to go into cold in the extreme, hot in the extreme. We're just at this sort of this balance all the time. Mm-hmm. That those mechanisms get switched off, and that's when problems can occur. So if we can, in our modern society, start to reintroduce those extremes in a measured way, we're not going to go mad. We're not going to, do ourselves damage and injury. But if that can be introduced in a controlled way, then we can turn those mechanisms on in a safe but effective way. And that, what you're saying, that sort of that periodic fasting, or that sort of time restricted eating, where you're sort of eating in a time window. Maybe you have your breakfast at 7 a.m, but by sort of 6, 7 in the evening, you've stopped eating.
Yeah.
And then you're looking at your sort of your insulin sensitivity levels and resistance, and eating later in the evening is not great. And certainly sort of, in that kind of fine window, that 2 to 3 hours before going to sleep, when melatonin kicks in, insulin resistance goes up, and then, we're not processing in the same way as we would do if it was sort of in the morning. So, all of these kind of factors need to be taken into consideration. So there's lots that we can do for ourselves that, don't take a lot to do, but will have huge benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that intermittent fasting, as you say, getting out of your comfort zone, pushing yourself harder, maybe with certain types of exercise, and then cold exposure, heat exposure as well, perhaps a sauna. I've got a sauna blanket at home. Don't have to go anywhere. It's like super easy, infrared sauna. You can do it for 40 minutes on a night time, or any time during the day. It's just convenient. You can listen to a podcast, read a book, be on the phone for work if you really wanted to, but you're in this blanket.
I've had a look at those actually. It's interesting. Really interesting.
They're really convenient, and of course it means you're not taking huge chunks of time out of your day. And I'm a big fan of trying to do 2 or 3 things at once to cut down on that. That waste of time. So you've got cold exposure or hot exposure, fasting, all great, and probably leads us nicely on to one of those other things that we can do to optimize our physical health, which is EMS. And that was the thing that obviously we've been through this similar conversation to this, and then we started talking about what you're involved in now, and it kind of just blew my mind. So what is What is it? What is EMS? How are you involved in it? Where do you see EMS going, and what's its utility? How can it be used in our lives to optimize our health?
Yeah, so I kind of briefly alluded to how I kind of got involved with it. So it was really through a request from one of my clients to sort of research. And I've always been open to different types of training, as I said, with the plow plate and all that sort of thing. So basically what EMS is, it's a stimulation of the muscle with an electrical impulse via the nerve endings. So if you go and pick something up, for example, your brain will send an electrical impulse to the muscle to contract, and the result is you lift up whatever it is you've gone to pick up. It's really that simple. So with exactly that. So EMS goes through a similar kind of process, as I said, through the nerve endings, but directly to the muscle. And the result is a contraction. So you still need to contract the muscle using the brain, but now the stimulus is coming from the pulse. So the pulse then makes the fibers, the contractile fibers, move over each other very, very rapidly. So we usually work at about 85 hertz. So you think of contraction, those fibers are moving over each other, contracting and relaxing 85 times a second. So it's intense. It's really intense. And you'll do like a 20-minute routine of lunges, squats, anything that you could do body weight wise. So, if you think about a body weight type sort of routine, you can be on your back, do sort of glute bridges, crunches if you wanted to. I mean, I tend to sort of stay to a fairly kind of functional type sort of exercise that we're going through, that kind of stretch contraction, that eccentric, that pulling, which is the most intense contraction of the muscle, more so than that shortening phase, because you think of all those forces that are acting on the muscle. So like an overhead reach, for example, or make it nice and functional, like for a golfer, for example, that do all those kind of rotational exercises. And all of that you can do without the need for any external resistance. So you don't need weights, you don't need resistance bands. You can use that with it, but it's not necessary to get an effective result from it. So it's having that neuromuscular link between the brain and the muscle, and it can actually reconnect pathways almost, because you're starting to think just about the muscle. You're not considering what you're doing with the weight. You're not thinking about how heavy the weight is. Is this going to hurt me? Am I going to get injured with it if I'm doing a heavy squat? Is my back going to give out? Are my knees going to give out? Is my knee tracking over my toe when I'm doing that in terms of good form that we all sort of are told about when we first train to be PTs? It's that whole kind of thing that you're now taking that out of the equation, so you can just purely focus on that muscle contraction and the quality of it. And for somebody that doesn't like going to the gym necessarily, or feels intimidated by it, or, again, are worried about doing themselves some damage, or if they have an existing injury or restriction, they can now exercise the right level and intensity by using EMS. Yeah. So it just allows you now to work with a population that potentially you wouldn't have had access to because of their restrictions, as I said, using, traditional resistance.
Yeah, weights and resistance and things.
So in that respect, and you'll get people that have never been to gyms, and you'll know people that by their movement patterns that you can see that they've never really exercised. The movements aren't fluid and they don't move in a particular way. And by using EMS, you can then get them just doing very normal, none of it's choreographed or complicated type moves. It's incredibly functional, like, reaching up and grabbing a tin out the cupboard, or, reaching behind you to pick up a pen or a bit of paper, or anything like that we can then do very functionally for the client without them worrying about having to, to have a weight or lifting at the same time.
Yeah, that makes sense. The bit we've probably missed out, I think, which would be really, really important, is some people might have heard of EMS. Maybe they've been to physio, or see the doctor, and they use EMS to track a particular muscle group when it's contracting. But what you're talking about is actually a full body suit where it looks kind of like a superhero suit. And so you can actually see all the muscles contracting in the upper limb, the lower limb, the trunk, and importantly, you can then stimulate any of those muscles to the level you want. So when someone is, as you say, going through functional movements, you can see what's happening in real time, and then you can augment it, you can improve it with the system. So that was the thing that blew my mind. Like, it wasn't just a single muscle. We weren't working on the quadricep or the bicep. Yeah. This is a full body suit.
The whole thing.
You look like a superhero, and you can measure and improve the whole muscular system. It's incredible.
Yeah. So yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So when you go and see a physio and you have that little sticker put on your leg, over the quadricep, for example, the muscle in the thigh, and it's stimulating that particular muscle group. So it's monophasic. So it's only sort of one muscle that's being stimulated. With the suit, it's biphasic. So you've got, front and back working, but as you say, all major muscle groups working simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think of large muscles that are being stimulated, so like in the legs and the backside, certainly in those kind of real thick erector muscles in the lower back, but certainly the glutes and around the sort of the lat area in the back. So all of that large muscle being stimulated, you're getting a lot of afterburn in respect of replacing the oxygen debt by how intense the muscles have been working. So you're getting that sort of calorie burn afterwards. So not only during the exercise you're doing, but the amount of muscle that's being stimulated will give you that good bang for your buck afterwards, because you're having to replenish those oxygen stores.
Yeah.
So and the more muscle you have, the more oxygenated blood required to fuel it. So that has a energy debt. So you need to be, fueling that, and that's taking, boosting your metabolism, increasing the amount of calories that you're burning at rest.
Yeah.
Which is, again, a win-win. So you're right. In terms of a particular suit that we're looking at the moment, you can work asymmetrically. So one side you can stimulate more intensely than the other. You can isolate if you want to. So like we're saying with the biphasic and the monophasic, you can isolate if you wanted to. If you had any muscle imbalance, so we invariably have one side that's inhibited, it's not working quite as effectively as the other side. We're one side dominant, usually with your right-handed or left-handed, whatever. Or you've had an injury at a site and that muscle then becomes inhibited. It switches off. That little proprioceptor can get sort of switched off for one reason or another, so it doesn't fire properly. Well, this way we can identify that muscle that's not firing, because it will then give you a printout or a graph to show you the nature of the contractile process of that particular muscle. So we can be very specific and say that this isn't firing correctly, so let's go fire it, and identify and then stimulate it specifically. And you can go across the chain, through the chain that way. So I could do sort of left buttock here and lumbar right if I wanted to.
Which is incredible, because you've got so many ways that can be used, from in neuro rehabilitation through to post musculoskeletal injury, right up to elite level sports where they're trying to get trying to shave a second off, say, an open water swim or something like that. Well, actually improving the symmetry of the shoulder girdle or the strength of the lower limbs are going to help them drive through the water. So EMS, I think, can be used for everybody potentially.
Yeah, no, I agree. And also there's a huge element in regard to the type of muscle that it stimulates. So we've got type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers. So type 1 being slow twitch, so endurance based, And then you've got type 2 that are fast twitch and, power explosive. So what we have with EMS is you're engaging the type 2 straight away. Whereas in normal resistance type exercise, you're getting through the sort of the type 1 first in terms of that fatigue. And once that's fatigue, then you're sort of getting into the type 2. Whereas with EMS, because of the level of stimulation, you're getting straight into type 2. So you're getting more power output and right at the beginning of the routine. So when you are actually fresh, you're working into those type 2 fibers. So in respect of sprint training, or where you need a high amount of power output and explosive power, it's ideal for that as well. So also incredibly functional because you can be doing the action itself. So if you were doing a sprint, you could have the suit on at a lower intensity, but it's absolutely working the muscle in that firing chain process.
Yeah.
So you can't get much more functional than that, but actually doing the activity while stimulating the muscle at the same time in a particular way.
Yeah.
And it'll create resistance. So you'll see, people with parachutes tied to the back to give them wind resistance, and they're working against that. So they're getting that sort of aerobic overload and muscle activation, that this now is stimulating the muscle specifically. So I can put a suit on and go out walking, for example, and have it on a constant pulse at 85 hertz. And it feels like that I'm wearing a weight vest because it's hard work, especially going uphill because the muscle's being switched on. But anterior, posterior, agonist, antagonist, simultaneously at the same time.
It almost sounds a bit like cheating. Like if you're a sprinter, and you're like, right, we're gonna strengthen exactly what you need at the right time. Sounds almost too good to be true, rather than
and you could get sort of partway through it and then switch the suit off, and then it's just you. So you get that kind of resistance, and then go.
Yeah.
We work with resistance bands, we're sort of around the waist and holding back and working against that, and then you let that go, or you have a release mechanism, and then you're off. You have that kind of explosive power. Exactly the same with this. So you could switch off the pulse and then go. But you've got all that kind of that build up, like that elastic resistance coming, and then you've got that recoil then to then explode out of it. So the training possibilities are endless. You're limited by your imagination.
Do you think it will ever become mainstream? Where do you think it can go? I mean, my head's going in two directions. One, it's thinking, well, if we're going to go and colonize space, and Elon Musk is planning on doing that, surely it has to have a utility there. It has to have a function there to keep the muscles working, obviously in that lower gravity. But the other way my brain's going is, if humanity carries on the way it's going and we become less fit, more technology dependent, more tied to our screens, going into maybe the metaverse and not leaving the house, could this be almost abused, where people just sit in the house and don't do anything, but their muscles are still working? Like, do you see what I mean? Like that is that a good thing, or is that awful? Like, I don't know. It's a matter of opinion, I guess.
Well, it is. I mean, it's very much like, the debate around AI at the moment and ChatGPT and all those sort of things. The technology is there. It's what you do with it. You're either going to use it for good or you're going to use it for bad, sort of, for the good of humanity or for sort of nefarious means. So, but I guess that's been a debate for time immemorial. At the end of the day, it's there. It's what you do with it. But with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
So going back to the superhero analogy, it's just like, it's intense, and that, you can overdo it. You can absolutely overdo it. So in terms of the protocols, recommend that certainly when you start using it, that it's probably once a week to begin with, maybe for the first sort of between 2 and 4 weeks, depending on the individual, how detrained they are. Mm-hmm. And then after that, you can start to increase it, but really allowing a good period of recovery in between, something like 48 hours to allow the muscle to recover, because you have this kind of build up, creatine kinase that can impact on the kidneys and all that sort of thing. So and rhabdomyolysis as well. But fundamentally, people can get that going to a spin class.
Yeah.
They anecdotally, again, a friend of ours went to a spin class and ended up in hospital because she just had too much acidosis.
Yeah.
So
there's a lot of people that might not have heard of rhabdo. So do you want to explain what that is to anybody who perhaps is thinking, what on earth did he just say?
Yeah. So it is that, it's kind of that buildup of lactic acid, and the kidneys are kind of filtering it out, and if it gets to a sort of level, that kind of creatine kinase level that gets sort of so high, the body then can't sort of process it, and then things start to impact on the kidneys. Yeah, so right. It's very, very rare. Let's make that clear. It's incredibly rare, but it happens. So, you have to be responsible and all of these sort of things. And I said, it can happen to you in a spin class, for example, and going back to my point about taking it easy, building it up gradually is absolutely where we need to go with this as well, because people get carried away because you're not feeling it initially like you would do if you're lifting a heavy weight. It's heavy, you're going to prepare for it. You're going to think about, actually, if I do a squat with 120 kgs on my back, it could actually impact my lower back or my knees. Something could pop out. So, you would take it easy. Whereas this is a different sensation altogether. It's very much like having your phone in your pocket on vibrate, but all over your body. That's the sensation of it. So it's absolutely not unpleasant. Yeah. A lot of people that try it for the first time, big smile on their face, their eyes light up. This feels amazing. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I do it as well. It's because of that kind of reaction. But, you just have to know that when people haven't used it before, or they're detrained, they're not exercisers on a regular basis, that you just have to make sure that you are easing them into it. Managing expectations that we talked about before, of just saying that, this will cause a level of muscle soreness. Like, if you go out gardening, for example, and you come in, you're like, yeah, I know I've done a bit. It's that sort of, response that you get. Usually it's that delayed onset. So you get it sort of the day after. Yeah. So not necessarily straight away, then it'll kick in. But the beauty of it is really hard to engage the glutes, the backside, those big muscles in the backside that we need, because it then comes around the sort of the hips, and that hip area, the pelvis being the junction of the body, and a lot of forces come up and a lot of forces come down. So if we can have a decent amount of stability in that area, it's going to be great. It will stimulate the glutes really well, but also those back erector muscles, those muscles that support the lower spine. So for back injury or, back stability, certainly activate the abdominal unit as well. So the abs, all of those things combined will give you a decent structure to then be able to, move forward. And stimulating and having a good level of muscle density is one of the biggest factors for longevity and health generally. Yeah, hugely important.
We talk about that a lot at Alphagenix, obviously, because optimizing your testosterone levels, one of the things it will do, it helps muscle fibers to form, increase bone density, helps exercise tolerance and recovery, and all of those things are a huge reason for longevity. So lots to think about, and I know we could probably talk about this all day, but
hours
conscious
we could geek out on it for hours.
Maybe we should do like a part 2 at some point. So I guess to finish off, how do people find you? Do you have a website? Are you on LinkedIn? And is there anything just finally you just want to share with anybody listening?
Yeah, it's probably best to reach out on LinkedIn, actually. I'm starting to become more present on those kind of platforms. I don't currently have a website, but a lot of my work that I do is word of mouth. In the sort of the circles that I work in, it's recommendation. But certainly, if you want to get in touch on LinkedIn, so just James Seilo, Seilo, I know it's a tricky name, kind of some weird Spanish, Irish origin there with a bit of Italian thrown in for good measure. So on LinkedIn, or just email me, jamesseilo@me.com.
Brilliant. Well, James, it's truly been a pleasure. As usual, I've enjoyed our conversation, and I shall speak to you very soon. Take care.
That's great. Thanks, Ross. Cheers.